Hello and welcome to our workshop. I'm Liz Chiu.
And I'm Sharon Smith.
And we have responsibility for speaking provision at the Centre for Academic English at Imperial College London, which is a major science research university that attracts talented STEM students and researchers from across the globe. They are very high achievers in their own disciplines, but not necessarily good communicators even in their own language, and might feel that spoken English is an obstacle rather than an aid to their progress.
So it's our job to build their confidence to speak and participate in discussions and move them forwards to become more effective communicators, able to explain their subject in different ways for a range of interactions. Now, people may question whether it's really possible to teach speaking, so we'll give our take on that now. We run fluency courses, now called Speaking Interactions, which we repeat throughout the year, and they're the most popular of all the listening and speaking courses we run. We sometimes have 3 classes of 20 students running simultaneously, so there's clearly a demand for this. And in class, when they start speaking, we can't get them to stop. It may be hard to provide evidence of improvement in fluency over a short period of time, but we can see students growing in confidence to participate and developing good strategies for managing interactions. Nowadays, we find greater demands being placed on students' speaking and listening skills in UK higher education generally. And in our institution, we've seen a recent shift towards developing employability skills for teamwork, collaboration, management and leadership, and with an increasing emphasis on group work and project-based learning. Grades now include a sizable proportion for communication, and assessments include spoken as well as written submissions. Researchers often have a requirement attached to their funding to ensure they participate in public engagement and outreach, and this has prompted us to develop new types of speaking provision. When we consider what our research students will need in terms of communication skills, the pandemic has thrown up examples on mainstream TV and international news of Imperial College scientists being required to explain complex matters to policymakers and the public, and being faced with sometimes hostile questioning that they can be not so well prepared for.
Well, we've heard from Sharon there about a possible future for many of the students and researchers who currently attend our classes. They may be called upon to explain their research in situations that none of us can imagine. They'll probably need to persuade funding bodies to support their work and to respond to questions from people who have no knowledge of their field. And we want to help them prepare for many different types of communication, which will test their higher level speaking skills, not just their fluency, but their oracy. At this point, we'd like to clarify what we mean by oracy and why we think it's so important. We refer to the work done in Cambridge by Neil Mercer and the team at oracycambridge.org. In partnership with Voice 21, they've produced this framework which sets out the skills needed to enable successful discussion, inspiring speech, and effective communication. And we take this as our definition of oracy. We are calling for a shift in the focus of EAP provision towards oracy, which we believe should be given equal weighting with the teaching of academic literacy. We'd like to open a conversation here with fellow professionals, and we invite your thoughts and comments on the subject. In a moment, we'll tell you about our current speaking provision. We just need to mention first that the platform we use is Microsoft 365, and we've been using the 365 apps for a couple of years already, so it meant that we could get on with building courses immediately when the online situation arose. We've been using class notebooks, Teams and SharePoint, forms for student responses, Stream for embedding videos, and we'll also be telling you about Flipgrid later. But first, Sharon's going to tell you something about the range of learning opportunities for developing speaking that we now offer online.
Technology now allows students to attend live classes from home. It gives them access to online digital resources and video recordings of their lectures. It even provides live captions that can be searched to find keyword references. Students have the power at the touch of a screen to record speech and replay it as much as they like, and to get audio translation in real time for all of the world's major languages. All of this was available pre-COVID. The pandemic actually presented an opportunity to explore the possibilities and potential benefits of the technology that our students were already using. With our online provision, we've made more space to speak in class by flipping our input and making materials accessible through Teams SharePoint. Some sessions are now run asynchronously with follow-up Q&A. Some focus on in-person activities with follow-up practice and audio-video submissions. And some focus on peer-to-peer feedback in class with follow-up feedback from the teacher and their own reflection on what's happened in class.
That very, very brief introduction has hopefully given you a flavour of what we do. And we plan to give you some concrete examples and invite you to share some of your own practice for teaching speaking online. In this workshop, we focus on the opportunities and unexpected benefits we've found rather than any difficulties we've faced, and we want to look forwards rather than back. We'll start by showing a large-scale face-to-face event that we converted to online for our pre-sessional course last summer. We think community building is one way we can offer more speaking opportunities to students and researchers who might be feeling isolated. Many of our doctoral students report a lack of social contact and rare opportunities to speak with even their closest colleagues. The pandemic has exacerbated that situation. Our goal has been to build safe community spaces online and encourage our student cohort to mix and meet outside of class, and we'll give 2 examples of this. We want to emphasise our pedagogical approach to support independent learning. All of our speaking courses, events and activities are designed with this in mind. We find technology provides new opportunities, and we'll highlight a couple of unexpected benefits we've found. At the end of the workshop, we'd like to hear what you think the future holds for the continuation of online or hybrid provision. In this section, we'd like you to think about large-scale events that you might have run or considered running, that perhaps you did face-to-face in the past, that you've maybe managed to move online, or perhaps are wondering whether you can do them online. And we'll give you some time for discussion in a small group, and we'd like you to submit some answers to a form. So first we'll give you an example from the Centre for Academic English. So let's take a look at some live events and think about some possible benefits that came from moving online. We really didn't expect any benefits. In fact, we were worried about converting this particular event to the online format. It's called Research Fest. We invite researchers from across the college to come and talk to our pre-sessional students each year. And it's great preparation for the students. They get to see model speakers interacting in exactly the way they need to for their final speaking assessment. They're going to be doing a viva in which they're going to be interacting, speaking, answering questions, responding appropriately, and explaining things in detail, even if they're quite hard and the listener doesn't understand their topic. So these researchers are doing all of those things and are the model that we want our students to follow. The second thing that the Research Fest gives the students is that opportunity to feel part of the Imperial College community, and they really do get excited by that feeling of being with the college researchers and even people who previously did the pre-sessional course, or professors and teaching fellows who have years of experience in the college. So let's take a look at this video, which will show us some of the action, and I hope you'll be able to hear the kind of interaction that we commonly get.
And sometimes some proteins are hard to guess is crystals. Yeah, especially. Yeah.
I know in some groups of the labs where people retired and died, and still they are still working on getting crystals.
So we've invited the Drones Society here. I think we'll see some real
This is
interaction.
communicating with radio. You see this antenna over here? Boom. This antenna is communicating with this antenna.
Fast and
what we
real.
found out is the smoke, what you usually see, these chemicals, is usually consists of lipids and fatty acids. This is what usually the difference.
Is it the difference?
Yeah.
This one more thing I concerning is that how about the rate, the response, how quick it could give you the response? Will it take time?
Less than 1 second.
Less 1 second.
Yeah, it's almost real time.
Oh yeah, yes.
You can see a real desire to
So this one,
communicate.
like usually, it's like flexible. So
It's a
you
challenge
can
for
calculate,
these students
but
to
you can also
understand.
recreate bone. That's correct, and so that can be used to treat some other types of injury.
So, how do you?
But the students are really keen because this is real interaction, and so this is a great opportunity for them. So we wondered, how could we translate that online? Let's take a look at the pre-sessional team for last year. You might be familiar with Microsoft Teams, and we've built here a channel. This is the general channel. We had social channels. We had rooms, which we used for the Research Fest and the poster events. So here's how we built our Research Fest channel. We had the schedule there so that everybody knew where they were going. We had the work that the students needed to do in their flipped sessions. We had all the instructions they needed, and we had this Flipgrid. And the Flipgrid was contributed to by each one of our researchers. In fact, you can see we had 24 presenters at the Research Fest and 24 videos for the students to watch. And this is how they spent their flipped session preparing, by watching the videos and leaving comments. In fact, the comments, let's take a look at this one. I think there are 30
Hello
comments.
everyone, I'm Daniel Freer, and I'm going to be talking to you about my PhD research topic, which is human-robot interaction. But I'm actually going to be talking about it in sort of 4 different categories because I've worked on lots of different projects while I'm here.
So then the students would
Hi,
leave a
Daniel.
comment.
Thank you for sharing. I think the brain-computer interface is really magical. And I also want to know, are there any applications in our reality? Yeah.
So the students had thought about the topic before going and asked a question. And so they were prepared in a way that they had never been for the face-to-face Research Fest. Let's take a look at what it looked like in one of the rooms and some of the interaction that we were getting there.
Yeah, I wonder, is it possible to use your conclusion to make a strategy to let everyone cycle for protecting our environment and apply it to our countries?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. That's the aim of my research, really. So you summarized it really well. So you got the idea really well. That's the aim of my research, to actually be able to make...
I just want to draw your attention to the fact that there are a lot of people in this room, but that the atmosphere is calm, that learning is happening, and that everybody has a chance to speak.
Behavioral stages. So those variables in those stages would give extra information on how those cycling policies, so that promotion of cycling should be made in regards of the different environment and the different behavior of people. So that's on one side, and the other part of your question that
So I think we've kept the benefit of providing the model speakers. We've kept the benefit of introducing the students into the Imperial College community and making them feel part of what was happening and giving them an opportunity to interact with people who were in their position maybe a few years previously themselves. Now, I just want you to compare the atmosphere that we've heard in the online room with the atmosphere in the very exciting event of the posters, which I'm going to play you from the face-to-face event. So this is genuinely the amount of noise. It's absolutely impossible to hear what the students are saying, and the interaction, while it's very exciting, it can't be of the same level as the interaction we were getting in the online room, where the atmosphere was calmer and where people had prepared and were able to think about what they wanted to say. So this was particularly important this year when we had, last pre-sessional, when we had a hearing impaired student on our course, and we just wonder how would he have managed with that amount of background noise. So that was the second really big benefit that we wanted to point out about the move online. So here's a summary of some benefits that we had not considered and certainly didn't expect. And we had twice as many speakers as usual. That's not a small consideration. For some reason, they were more eager to join us online than they usually are face to face. So now it's your turn, and we're going to put you in small groups so that you can meet some of your fellow participants in this workshop. You can discuss your thoughts about what you've seen. You can share your practice about what you've done, and specifically about large-scale events that you've managed to hold online. And we would ask each of you to complete the form individually using the link that you see here or the QR code to reach it. And we'll call you back in about 6 minutes. If you're watching the video, we're going straight on to the next slide. In this section, we're going to give you 2 examples of how we encourage our students to be part of a community and give them opportunities for speaking by participating in groups, often outside of class. And we'd like to encourage you to think of your own opportunities for doing this and to share your practice of what you've already done in the past or what you continue to do online now. The Conversation Forum is something that I started about 15 years ago in conjunction with the Imperial College Volunteer Centre, as it was then. And we ran it for many years as a face-to-face endeavour. And it was set up originally as a conversation partner scheme. But we also ran events such as the Café Scientific, where researchers from across the college can just have informal discussions. Anyone who wants to practice their speaking can apply and join in. And we also have volunteers who help us to keep things running smoothly. So when COVID struck, we introduced virtual teas twice a week, in fact, and we made it much easier to join the team with a single click. That's automated, and to join the meeting, the virtual tea meeting, with a single click. So let's take a look at the virtual tea room, and in fact the team that we have built for the Conversation Forum. There's in the general channel, people can meet, they can say hello, they can introduce themselves. We have a tea room with the links clearly available for every week for people to join. And we have some themed rooms. So if we have more people, we can just expand and people can switch on the camera in those rooms to have a conversation with some different people, and they can move around. So there's a certain amount of freedom, and everybody, any member of the college can join. Well, you can probably guess a lot of the benefits that we've found with the online conversation forum. The interaction is very relaxed and entirely student-led, and fluency of students who are particularly reluctant speakers or shy really begin to blossom, let's say, and to become more confident, more likely to join in and to start conversations. So that was to be expected. But nobody, when I set the online forum up 2 or 3 years ago, nobody expected us to be in a global pandemic and a lockdown situation. We were able to keep the conversation forum going, but actually extend it with these virtual teas, so that we were really offering something to counter the imposed self-isolation and the quarantine that a lot of our students had to go through during lockdown. And the benefit was to the students as well, the volunteers as well as the students. One thing that I was able to do in virtual teas was to direct students to look at the different functionality of Teams meetings and to explore that as just something that was interesting to talk about. And one student who wasn't able to keep up with the conversation, I suggested she tried switching on the live captions in Teams, and it was a game changer for her. She then was able to use the live captions for all of her Teams meetings in her master's studies, and that made a big difference to her in those early days in October, when she was struggling a bit to understand and to keep up. Opportunities, well, if we had more time, we would hold more events, that's for sure. And we're looking at expanding and different things that we can do. When we get to a critical mass, which this lockdown situation has actually forced this to happen, the forum starts to run itself, and students are now making their own arrangements to meet, and it's a much more lively place. We already link our fluency classes to the conversation forum, but this is an opportunity for future development. We will link more class activities to this mixed community group who's really up for it and keen to have these opportunities to speak.
Okay, so another area where building that sense of community is seen as key was with our doctoral students. And when we moved to an online provision, we knew this would be even more important given the potential challenges of running speaking classes through screens. So we looked at the alternatives and finally opted for creating a dedicated space for each group in a Microsoft team. Just a little bit of background, our doctoral students, prior to and indeed now during the online provision, attend specific speaking courses at time-relevant points on their PhD journey. So in short, though the group might be from a range of disciplines and have a range of needs, they are, broadly speaking, very homogeneous, with performing similar tasks, facing very similar challenges, and so can in fact form really lovely, supportive, cohesive groups. So the discrete team then was what we went with. When we were devising these courses, our aim was to ensure that despite the potential challenges of delivering an effective online speaking practice, our students would continue to get a great deal out of opting to join the course. And the team can house tailored flipped input. It has channels which provide the space for meaningful practice opportunities with their peers, focusing on speaking events that they're likely to encounter. The challenge, though, was to build and retain a sense of belonging, a sense of community. Perhaps one main reason for that is that a supportive interactive speaking practice can be really challenging with a random set of strangers from around the college or indeed around the world online. So we wanted our online provision to build a sense of community where the group consisted of already encountered trusted individuals. Okay, so a challenge in itself. But it wasn't solely about feeling comfortable in speaking practice. We feel a good level of trust also leads to more thoughtful, well-considered feedback from peers. More on that later. And that will in turn help each individual understand how they're communicating and thus guide them in how to develop their oracy skills. So the space has to feel safe. And this relies heavily on developing this sense of self-contained community. We now feel that this is not just achievable online, but arguably enhanced in some respects through this online delivery. So each group has its own team, and we can personalize each team with its name, icon, etc. Each team will have its own channels for meetings, and thus posts and recordings will all stay within this team. Each team has its own class notebook, as you can see at the top here. Just a little bit on class notebook for those that are less familiar. The class notebook can house the input material for flipped learning. As we mentioned earlier, we wanted to enable students to access materials asynchronously and to have access to a range of materials. So content library there, and just a little dip into that content library. In fact, you can see here, the input is really clearly signposted to help students find and select what support they need. And so here we can house the input, but also in which they can, of course, access asynchronously to suit their needs. But importantly, for those less confident, it allows them to rehearse for the speaking in advance of a class. You can see that there's a collaboration space, which is really valuable for working on tasks together. And there's a namespace for each individual student, where they can make notes, submit further individual practice recordings, and speak to their teachers, and more on that later. But in terms of community building, another real value of setting up courses in this way, we discovered, is that in advance of the course, we can focus on getting the students on board, so allowing them to explore the materials and to understand course expectations. So here in the welcome pages, we have a number of sections. Just quickly, I can point out the Meet Your Teacher feature, for example. This is here really to establish initial contact, which along with the posts and the messages is a springboard to encouraging students to introduce themselves to each other using the channels. There's a recording room for this. They might record a short introductory video, which often they do, and that puts faces to names and voices to information. This level of familiarity with the course and the other participants prior to the first session is something that tends to be less easy to achieve in face-to-face courses. So for these short online courses, discrete team groups have been adopted to create and nurture a safe space and a community of practice that hopefully results in more effective and impactful speaking development.
Okay, your turn again, and you'll be going back to the same small groups to have further discussions. This time we'd like you to add some comments to our Padlet. The link is there on the screen, and also the QR code. And this Padlet is going to remain open. You can add to it after the following session and also after the workshop has finished. So again, about 6 minutes for discussion, and then we'll see you back here. If you're watching the video, we're going straight on to the next slide now. I think most people feel that speaking is more closely connected with identity than writing is. We tend to feel more anxious about our voice being heard than about our words being read. And we worry more about being judged badly for a poor speaking performance than for a poorly written text. So in speaking classes, agency is even more critical. And we're always looking for new ways to support student autonomy and personal identity. We find we get better buy-in from students when they have control over their participation in speaking tasks. For example, if students control the video recordings and they hit the start and stop buttons themselves, and they have owner permissions over the recording, we find they're more relaxed and more enthusiastic about speaking and about having their speech recorded, and that applies particularly to the nervous speakers. Well, I hope we can all agree that independent development of speaking is essential. Before we share our own practice with 2 examples, we'd like to make a couple of observations. The first is that interaction with a teacher is different. And when it's the case of an English teacher or a communication skills teacher, we could say that it's not the most useful type of interaction for our students to practice. Far more real is interaction with peers, so this is where we place our emphasis. And the second observation is that the learning experience is different for each individual, and we have to make sure we respond to learner differences. So some people are uncomfortable with in-person communication and feel more relaxed speaking through a screen from the safety of their home environment and with the distance afforded by online meetings, while others obviously enjoy the proximity and the face-to-face connections. Our question is, how do we achieve the best learning outcomes for each individual? Well, let's go back to Sharon for some insights from her doctoral speaking courses.
Okay, so we're returning now to independent learning, and in fact we're back in this section with the doctoral students, and I want to say just a little bit about the teacher-free element of the peer-to-peer feedback that we mentioned in the heading here. I think it's probably a common experience that moving to online provision created lots of challenges, and not least in the speaking context of ensuring that our students, while practicing in rooms so that they could have genuine time on speaking practice, 2s or small groups, managing those rooms as from a teacher's perspective was really very difficult. And I often found myself, certainly in the initial courses that I ran, really troubleshooting, having people arrive late, having to deal with people's technology and so on. And I was a little bit anxious that what was going on in the rooms wasn't necessarily observed and supported. So quite quickly I decided that a solution to that would be to come up with a set of, if you like, instructions, trying to explain what people might be doing, what their roles might be, what the focus of the task was. And we can see that over here. It would be something like this, a text like this, that I'd paste into the chat in each of the rooms of my team. And I'd open these before class, so the notes, if you like, the instructions would be there in the room, so that when the students were sent off to their rooms to work in their pairs or small groups, they knew they could open up the chat and find any instructions to check, to confirm ideas. What was really interesting was that out of that, I wanted to check that the instructions were being followed and understood and that they made sense. So I had a quick look at what was going on, and I saw that far from it being problematic and people struggling with my instructions, they took control of the room. They managed the room really well. They started dividing up the time they had, giving each other roles, suggesting who would do what and how they would do it and what their personal spin might be on it. And that was really important, because they often maybe tweaked it somewhat to fit their real life circumstances. So this is a great example of the students taking control of their own learning, which was very exciting. And I also like to highlight just a little section here. This is one example. Sometimes there's more language with a slightly different focus, but the idea of giving appropriate feedback to your colleagues is really crucial, and you can see a couple of prompts in purple there. I like the way to encourage them to say specifically what was good about a talk. And we have here the prompt. It would have helped me if you had really to try to avoid that "you spoke too fast" kind of comment, but also to remind students as they were giving feedback and hearing feedback that effective communication is not about how well somebody can speak, but it's about how well they've enabled the listener to understand the message. So that's a really useful little prompt to have there in that chat, I found, as a reminder. But actually, very soon, what we saw was that indeed the students were really doing some great work in these rooms. And I think it's a good idea now to just play this little section with Chiu and Sarah as they talk about a short speaking task that Chiu has just finished.
We can make a decision whether this patient may have a glaucoma in the future. Yeah, so this is what we are doing now, and yeah, I think that's all, and maybe it's not 3 minutes.
Well, it's 2:20, so it's fine. I mean, you don't need to do the 3 minutes, I guess. So, okay, I can give you feedback.
Yeah.
So there was some words that I was not really catching. I don't know, maybe if you need to strengthen the pronunciation in some of technical words, especially because also if I'm not native speaker, if some strange words came sometimes like, yeah, or maybe explain some things. For example, I like when you explain also the reasons why you are studying this and in what consists really this coma disease. And I think that maybe, but I understand that this is our beginning, so I was lacking more clear definition or to have like a key message that I can keep, because I was kind of receiving many information. But I think that in general it was good.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe you can use some of the linking works and these expressions to guide the listener.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. So yeah, thank you.
Right, hopefully you're all able to hear that short extract of that conversation, that feedback going on in the room, in the channel. And I just want to comment on what I feel is a really good level of feedback that we observe here. And when I think back to sometimes the feedback that would take place in the classroom, not always quite so effectively, I would say, this example and similar proved to be, in my opinion, much more engaging, much more thoughtful set of feedback. And I wondered why this was. We considered this at some length. And we thought that possibly, and this is where the teacher-free bit comes in, that perhaps one of the reasons that the peer-to-peer feedback was as thorough as it was, let's say, is that there is an absence of the teacher. And what we would often see in the classroom is with a teacher hovering, students would defer to their greater knowledge, possibly. And here it's just them, so they take a little bit control and in fact run with it, in my opinion. So I think the teacher-free peer-to-peer feedback, the absence of the teacher, is really quite helpful for promoting more freedom, if you like, in discussing how they got on. I do believe also that the nature of the course structure helps here, because in each lesson and across the suite of lessons, you have a kind of series of exercises of you do the task, you receive feedback, and then you redo in another room, possibly, or with the same student, or you do another similar task afterwards. And therefore, the feedback they receive at this point has an immediate impact on them possibly improving aspects of their speaking and being more successful. So I think they listen better and think more carefully about feedback for that reason. We also talk a lot about putting the listener at the heart of effective communication, effective speaking, that you have to consider how well they've followed the meaning, how well they've accessed complex information, and that it's your job as a speaker to make sure that happens. So I think for this reason, they really value the feedback they're getting. They see the importance and relevance of that feedback. And of course, we also feel very strongly that the supportive nature of this group, we spoke before about it being quite safe and a lovely community of practice. I think that adds to that as well. So ultimately, what we observe is that peer-to-peer feedback is nearly always thoughtful and insightful in these rooms. Of course, it's really challenging for our students, for anyone for that matter, to make changes to their speaking skill, their speech, if you like, on the hoof, to internalize any feedback so they understand the issue, so they understand what to do to address that, and then to be able to immediately and successfully apply those changes in real time. Very challenging. Well, I pointed out the personal space in the class notebook earlier, and this is where we ask our students to go after the lesson, and we encourage them towards more reflective work on what they observed, what they heard, and indeed on their own performance. But it's really hard for successful reflective work. Unlike writing, of course, speaking is incredibly ephemeral, and so that opportunity to revisit something, as in writing, that is fixed and we can hold and pin down, happens only through recording. So for this reason, the fact that the discrete Teams rooms, the channels where these conversations take place, allow not just the practice, but crucially allow students to record what's taking place in those channels, well, that's just an incredible support. Students can, after class, go back and revisit these recordings, and they do this, as you can see from the notes here from Sarah. And in fact, just to highlight this, she even, in her reflection, points to the fact that she's listening back to these recordings. And you'll notice also here that if invited, the comments from the teacher can guide students and possibly scaffold future practice. So it's an interesting dialogue as well. If invited, we do this. I should add, though, it's not just the speaker who uses the recordings. The teacher as well can go back and listen to individuals and leave further feedback. You can see here I've added a couple of comments, but I've also added feedback as an audio recording here after listening to the students in the rooms. But also from a pedagogical perspective, this allows the teacher to have eyes on what works in the class, what's going on, and this may well lead to future changes in the course setup or class delivery and so on. Of course, recording devices have been available to us for a long time, but the advantages here are that everything can be found in one place. Everyone is recorded, not just those who choose to submit recordings. And recordings of pair and small group interaction are easy. And I think all of this is real food for thought as we consider a return to campus.
I'd like to tell you a bit more about Flipgrid. We saw it briefly earlier in this session, but I want to emphasise the importance and the usefulness of Flipgrid for supporting independent learning and supporting speaking development that students can control and use to their own benefit outside of class. So this is an asynchronous tool. I think it's the most useful tool I've found for enabling students to practice, to record, reflect and redo. I think it also has the really great benefit that students can say a little bit and then pause the video and think about what the next thing is they want to say. And if they don't like what they've recorded, they can delete one part of it or all of it. This gives them the chance to develop that confidence they need to let go of that support of using memorized speech whenever they're giving a presentation and whenever they're talking about their topic. It allows them to develop that autonomy of spoken English that they feel in control because they can try it once. Little by little they can build that confidence as they go. So let me give you an example of this task. I asked a group of presentation students in a class called Stand Up and Speak to describe in 1 minute their tech setup that they were using, because they were all online, and I knew they all had difficulties with some aspect of technology, or maybe they could boast really fast internet and no problems at all. And I wanted to hear what they had to say and get them to feedback on each other. But I wanted to be able to give them some feedback on the way they spoke. And this was a timed task. They had 1 minute maximum, 30 seconds minimum. And I'd just like to give you an example of one of the students, because I think the interaction was quite interesting.
While my computer and internet connection have been very beneficial in terms of helping me stay connected with my classmates and professors at university, they have come with some limitations, and 2 limitations in particular. The first limitation is that sometimes my internet connection slows down or doesn't work at all, and that really prevents me from being able to watch the live sessions that we have for certain classes. And the second limitation is that sometimes my laptop freezes and I can't navigate or multitask on it when that happens. So if I could upgrade, my first choice would just be to get faster internet connection, and the second would just be to get rid of any bugs that are on my computer.
So we had a response from one of the students.
Hi, Sarah. That was really clear, and I really like how you introduced the topic that you were going to talk about in the very beginning. And yeah, I totally agree that technology helps us helps make our life more convenient, but at the same time, it comes with a lot of limitations. And I'm personally struggling with slow internet connection as well, so I can totally relate with that. Yeah. Bye-bye.
I'm really impressed by how well the students get to know each other by leaving asynchronous videos. Let me just show you the comment that I left, because I was impressed with Sarah's sense of timing. Sarah, that was super clear, and you actually look like a professional speaker. How did you manage to do that in exactly 1 minute? Did you do it first time like that, or did you have to record that a couple of times to get the timing right? Really interested to know. And this was the response that Sarah gave me.
Hi, Liz. So it didn't work the first time that I recorded it because I got muddled up in my words. So I tried it, I think, 2 to 3 more times, and then I think on the 3rd or 4th try it was good. But thank you for your comment.
So that was an experience of Flipgrid, and I've had many successful experiences of Flipgrid where the students have just discovered what a fantastic tool it is for preparing for giving presentations, but just generally for improving their speech. This is where we can improve oracy, I think, is to have a task, to try to achieve it well, to give yourself time to review it, to reflect on it, and to do it better. So that's my final thought on Flipgrid. I think it's my favorite tool of the online period.
So we've explored some of the ways in which we've adapted our teaching provision in response to the move to online delivery. We outline here the practices we view as opportunities, what we plan to carry forward with our return to campus, whether that's teaching online, in person, or possibly teaching hybrid classes. And the first 2 bullet points here, the implementation of which will enhance greater reach and access, are central to our provision. The last 3 are fundamental support for what is our ultimate goal, and that is of improving the oracy of our students and researchers in a meaningful way. So yes, many opportunities and food for thought really as we do consider going back to campus. But our final thoughts now are not to our immediate return, but how we see speaking provision in the coming years, how it might develop. And we want to really reimagine speaking provision and consider how things might change. We absolutely feel that we need to develop the tools, the space and the know-how for independent learning, because we want to empower our students to adapt to their scenario, to be flexible and to be able to achieve their goals without constantly referring back to us.
And we want to review current practice in HE, which we think has changed significantly in the past year, so that we'll be able to provide appropriate scaffolding for our students and for our researchers by understanding their needs. And finally, the point that we mentioned at the beginning about giving greater importance to oracy, we hope we've shown you with some of our practice the ideas that we have, that we've already developed, but we think there's a lot more to be done in this respect. It would be interesting to know from everybody, to hear back from our fellow EAP professionals about current practice in terms of speaking provision. To what extent do we focus on accuracy rather than fluency? This is a problem that we've seen with students themselves focusing on worrying a lot about their pronunciation or their grammar, but also teachers giving feedback which focuses on the pronunciation and the grammar. And we'd like to move away from that towards greater effectiveness, helping students to become more effective communicators. And in particular, we think this means putting the listener at the heart of all interaction. So a greater sensitivity to audience, a greater sensitivity to the context and the setting and the purpose of their speaking. And we'd like to hear your ideas for your own contexts and for your own students and researchers. And maybe we can put that together as a conversation in EAP for the next 2 years until we meet again.
Thank you.
So as we conclude this workshop, we'd like to remind you to add your thoughts to the Padlet that we've been working on for the topics of community building and independent learning. But also there will be a Flipgrid, which we'll leave open for some time. And we'd ask you to contribute a video of your own for that, but also to respond to other videos that you find from the other participants of the workshop. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you again soon.